honestly did not care whether I lived or died. But now I can.
You think if he didn't go to death row, would he still be alive?
Wow.
It's hard to say.
I can't leave this straight. You know, I can't go until y'all really know what time it is.
For almost decades, the world swallowed one approved explanation for how Tupac met his end. A sudden street attack in Las Vegas, days fading in a hospital bed, followed by silence forever. File sealed. That was the narrative audiences were told to trust. Yet today that tale is cracking under pressure from a voice nearer to Tupac than most alive. MCC Supreme Shakur, his real brother, stepped onto the Piers Morgan show and hinted the masses were steered wrong for years. This isn't noise from an internet conspiracist chasing clicks alone. This is blood. A man who shared childhood with Tupac, knew his soul firsthand, and now stares unblinking into the lens. He talks softly yet charged, measuring each phrase while suggesting that much of what the world believes about Tupac's death refuses to fit. When Piers presses him on Diddy and years of denials, claims of zero involvement in Tupac's killing, Ree makes one thing obvious. He rejects them completely. He voices deep suspicion and shows no fear saying it publicly. The stakes rise, truth trembles, and silence suddenly feels dangerous for everyone watching.
What did you say that day when he called you?
You know, I have my guys with me, Thug Life guys, and we heard what he had to say. He basically said he ain't have nothing to do with my brother's murder.
He goes further, revealing that this doubt didn't suddenly appear. It's been building for years. He says he warned Diddy a long time ago that truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deeply it's buried. That exchange, according to Ree, took place back in 2008, when Diddy personally reached out, trying to reassure the family of his innocence. Now, 17 years later, Ree is repeating the same message. The real story hasn't disappeared, it's only waiting. This doesn't feel like careless guessing. It feels like the voice of someone carrying knowledge he's not ready to fully expose. You can see it in his stare. There's weight behind it. And really, think about this. If your own brother had died and you genuinely trusted the official version, would you return to national television decades later to tear it apart piece by piece? Almost certainly not.
I'm feeling quite strongly that you don't believe Diddy. I don't think you believe a word of it.
It seems like he got a whole bunch of power, like absolute power.
Most people crave closure. They want the pain to settle so life can continue. Yet Ree is still hunting for truth almost 30 years later. What stands out most is his restraint. He isn't shouting conspiracies or tossing out reckless accusations. Instead, he seeds uncertainty with intention, choosing every word carefully, like someone who knows exactly what he's triggering and why now is the moment. Diddy is facing federal charges, his empire squeezed from all sides. History shows that's when voices long kept quiet begin to break their silence. No1 is saying Tupac survived or vanished into some hidden life. But when his own brother publicly challenges a story the world accepted for decades, it forces uncomfortable questions. Because if Ree is right, then huge parts of hip-hop history may be built on lies. That tension drags everything back to 2008. Back then, Diddy was reportedly losing sleep over whispers tying him to Tupac's death. And rather than brushing them off, he allegedly reached for the phone and called the Shakur family himself. Think about that.
Puffy called me though. Puffy called me back in the day. He called me, he was like, I just want you to know I ain't have nothing to do with your brothers. You know, I know who you are, but we never met.
People who feel untouchable by rumors don't usually pick up the phone to a family grieving a loved one more than a decade later. Yet, according to accounts, the gossip on the streets had grown loud enough that Diddy felt compelled to act. Through radio host Big Boy, a conversation with Ree was arranged. Imagine that moment. Diddy, likely flanked by advisors and maybe lawyers, insisting over and over that he had no role in the shooting, swearing his innocence with intensity. But Ree wasn't buying it. Not then. Not now. His reply was concise, almost chilling in its foresight. The truth always comes out. For words that resonate with far more gravity today, fast forward to 2025, Diddy is staring down federal racketeering charges. His properties have been raided. People who once stayed silent are speaking out. The pressure is mounting. In hindsight, that 2008 call looks less like a conversation and more like calculated damage control. Diddy may have thought he could appease the family, even shape public perception to back his innocence. Instead, it seems to have done the reverse. Re-listened, absorbed the denials, but never truly accepted them. And now, 17 years later, he's on national television declaring that Diddy's story doesn't hold water.
We talk about things that are nonsense. We don't even entertain nonsense, my brother.
So we not even going to
That leads to a deeply uncomfortable question. If someone is truly innocent, why feel compelled to personally contact the victim's family years later to explain yourself? Most people brush off false accusations, but he couldn't. The murmurs were getting louder. Connections were being made, dots were aligning, and he appeared determined to stay ahead of the story before it swallowed him. The problem is, the moment you start urgently trying to prove your innocence, suspicion often grows. And from Ree's point of view, the warning he gave years ago now seems to be unfolding in real time. The truth, as he believes it, is finally pushing its way into the light. Now think about this rationally. If those recordings meant nothing, why would federal prosecutors keep them sealed away for decades? Why would statements from Keefe D be taken seriously enough to eventually build charges largely on his own words? That's where the story turns unsettling. Those tapes reportedly sat in evidence lockers for years while Diddy was building an empire, collecting awards, delivering speeches about peace and unity, and publicly denying any role. Every denial, every public appearance, all while those 47 mentions stayed buried in the shadows. Now, with Diddy facing federal racketeering charges and his entire operation under scrutiny, those same recordings suddenly feel impossible to ignore. What once felt like distant history now looks dangerously relevant again. From a legal standpoint, the timing fits. Federal prosecutors often lean on older allegations to show long-term patterns of behavior. And if they argue that Diddy was running an alleged organization, it naturally opens the door to revisiting alleged actions from the 1990s. The vivid descriptions attributed to Keefe D, involving million-dollar bounties and alleged death plots, weren't just sensational talk. They've been openly discussed as allegations that could, at least theoretically, reconnect Diddy to one of the most unresolved deaths in music history. If those recordings ever reach a courtroom, Diddy's carefully constructed image of innocence could face serious strain. And it's important to note that when federal agents raided Diddy's mansions, they reportedly weren't searching for Tupac-related material. Their focus was on modern accusations tied to racketeering and financial crimes. But investigations rarely follow a straight line. Sometimes the most explosive discoveries happen by accident. According to public discussion, agents going through Diddy's personal files reportedly came across documents marked with a single word that reignited decades-old theories: Cuba. On the surface, it might sound insignificant, but context changes everything. Tupac's aunt has been living in exile in Cuba since 1984. That detail alone has fueled speculation for years. Coincidences exist, but in a federal investigation of this magnitude, nothing is easily brushed aside, especially when it echoes long-standing claims that Tupac may have escaped after allegedly faking his death.
Part of Tupac's legend is that he'd been shot 5 times and survived before that fateful night here in Las Vegas in 1996. And because of that, Tupac's legacy has always been linked to Vegas.
That opens the door to stories told by Tupac's former bodyguard, a man who for years insisted he played a role in secretly getting Tupac out of Las Vegas alive. According to those accounts, the plan was elaborate: a body switch at the hospital, discreet private flights, a carefully staged route through Barbados, and finally arrival in Cuba. Cuba was always described as the end point, supposedly under the personal protection of Fidel Castro himself. For years, these claims were mocked as pure fiction. Then, according to reports tied to the situation, the bodyguard promised to release evidence and suddenly disappeared from public view altogether. If references to Cuba truly exist inside Diddy's private files, people naturally ask why. Some dismiss it as coincidence. Others see it as something more troubling, possibly awareness of or involvement in monitoring something connected to Tupac. The same question keeps resurfacing: why would Diddy possess documents tied to Cuba unless it involved someone or something he felt compelled to keep track of? For years, residents in Havana have reported sightings of a man with Tupac's build, moving quietly through neighborhoods, slipping into cafes, and vanishing before anyone could capture a clear image. Blurry footage, eyewitness whispers, and persistent rumors painted a picture of a legend living quietly in plain sight. Here's where the theory grows darker. If Diddy's files contain communications with Cuban contacts, records of international transfers, or surveillance-style notes tracking Tupac's movements, the conversation shifts entirely. At that point, it stops sounding like a simple cover story and starts being framed as something much larger, potentially involving multiple countries. In that version, the so-called Cuba files are discussed as a missing link, something that could suggest Diddy knew Tupac survived and helped preserve one of the biggest deceptions in hip-hop history. And if federal prosecutors ever choose to reveal those files publicly, the shock could completely rewrite what people believe about Tupac's fate. That pulls everything back to September 1996. When investigators revisit the official records from that time, inconsistencies jump out. Start with the coroner's report. It's meant to be exact and unquestionable. Yet Tupac's listed height and weight were reportedly wrong. These are basic measurements medical staff routinely confirm. Errors happen, but considering Tupac's worldwide fame, many question how such details weren't double-checked with the entire world watching. Then there's another unsettling detail. The crematorium worker who allegedly handled Tupac's body retired immediately after the case, not months later, but right away, finishing the job and leaving the profession entirely. People naturally wonder why someone would walk away right after handling the most high-profile case of their career. And finally, there's the shooting itself. It occurred on one of the busiest nights Las Vegas had seen, right after the Tyson fight on September 7th. The strip was overflowing with people, cars, and cameras. Yet no clear eyewitness ever came forward who could definitively identify the shooter or the vehicle. S.J. Knight, who was seated next to Tupac during the attack, has hinted for years that something doesn't line up. In a 2014 interview, he even suggested that the absence of arrests might point to a deeper explanation, implying that Tupac's fate may not be as simple as it's always been presented.
I ain't the nigga killed Tupac, I'm the nigga protected Tupac. Yeah. But at the same time, bitch ass Puffy can give him a mother star, and every rat in the world said he didn't want to kill Tupac.
Pause on that claim for a second. Suge was there. He survived the gunfire. And yet, year after year, he's hinted that the version sold to the public doesn't completely align with what really happened. Taken individually, each discrepancy might look accidental, but together they start to reveal a pattern. Wrong details on official paperwork. Crucial witnesses vanishing or choosing silence. No solid eyewitness accounts. Medical workers stepping away immediately after touching the case. So the question becomes unavoidable. Was this one of the most botched investigations of modern times, or was someone working relentlessly to ensure the truth never surfaced? Now, with Diddy facing serious legal exposure and multiple federal probes, those unresolved questions feel urgent again. Prosecutors are now describing Bad Boy Records as an alleged organization with accusations that resemble organized crime more than a music label. As new information comes out, the conversation is no longer just about chart-topping hits. It's about power, control, exploitation, and enforced silence.
That used the business empire he controlled to carry out criminal activity, including trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and the obstruction of justice.
Witnesses falling silent. Files going missing. The same blueprint from the Las Vegas case reappearing decades later. If people can still vanish from the conversation today, even with modern protections and federal oversight, it forces a chilling question about what could have happened back in 1996. And if Tupac did escape, purely as a hypothetical, it wouldn't have been simple. It would have demanded massive coordination, serious money, absolute loyalty, possibly intelligence-level involvement. The kind of operation that only survives if everyone involved understands the cost of talking. In that light, the so-called Cuba files wouldn't just rewrite hip-hop history. They would point to something far larger, something that edges closer to international espionage than music industry drama. And this is where the story pauses, but the questions refuse to stop. Nearly 30 years later, too many pieces still don't sit comfortably where they're supposed to. Maybe the official story explains part of what happened. Maybe it doesn't explain everything. And maybe the truth is far more complicated than we were ever told. That's why this conversation still matters. So what do you think? Does the accepted narrative still hold weight? Or do these repeating patterns raise questions that deserve real scrutiny? Drop your thoughts in the comments.